Welcome back to Burn the Haystack with Josh and Jesse.
I'm Jesse.
And I'm Josh.
And this is a show to help you save the best and burn the rest of your culture and faith practices.
And today we have a very special guest with us who we've been meaning to have for a long time. And I know, everyone, I'm sorry it's taken so long, but he's here. He's finally here. And I'm so excited to have Justin Khoe with us today. Welcome, Justin.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
This has been a while in the making. There's been a whole lot of things that have gone on behind the scenes. We actually did record a whole episode at one point, but you know what? You guys deserve the best. So here we are recording it again to make sure that you guys get the highest quality episode ever. So,
it makes us sound like
professionals.
It makes us sound like the first episode was like a complete failure and we just had to scrap it or something like
that. and in all transparency, that was entirely my fault. I have been going through this like rebranding, launching of a brand new show, and I contacted you guys a couple months ago because I thought I was ready to go. And as it turns out, I wasn't. And I'm glad I sat on the idea a little bit longer. There was some important work that had to be done. And now we are live. So thank you guys for your patience in doing a kind of take two of the interview. I appreciate that.
That's
I mean, I was just excited to get to chat to you even further. I mean, we had a whole chat. Now I get to have a whole nother chat. And for me, that's just all good things, right? So win.
Yes. All right. So we are going to do a quick bio intro for Justin, for those of us who don't know it. But before we, I guess, get into anything too deep, we have to address the most important part of the show. And that is, Josh.
That is, of course, the question of the week. And we just love this part of the show. It's our favorite. So obviously later we're going to talk about rebrand, what Justin's doing now. I'm sure you guys are familiar with what he has done in the past, but right now we have to talk about a serious topic, okay? What movie have you rewatched the most and why?
Oh. The movie that I have watched and rewatched the most is Disney's, Pixar's The Incredibles.
Oh, that's a good
so
one.
Good. The first one, not the second one. The second one was just as good. I was so excited when number 2 came out, and it did not let me down in the least bit. But this takes me back all the way down to high school. I think it was in between my sophomore and junior year. I had taken like an extra English class during summer school. And so we'd go into school for a couple hours every single day over the course of the summer. And during the breaks that would take place in between kind of, you had a period and then kind of a little bit of time, we would watch The Incredibles. And we would watch it every single day of summer school, and it never got old. We would watch it day in and day out. And it was so much fun. So for me, The Incredibles, summer school, maybe 2005 or so is when I remember that.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. Amazing movie. Definitely part of my childhood as well. I would have to say that The Incredibles is pretty close there, but for me, the most watched movie, again, is probably a children's movie. It was probably Ice Age. Do you guys remember that movie?
Oh, Ice Age was really good,
yes.
Yeah.
The original Ice Age, not like the 17 sequels that they did afterwards, which I just lost count. But I remember the reason it was the most watched movie for me is because it was the first DVD that my family ever owned after buying a DVD player. So for a long time, my family only had Ice Age and maybe like a few nature documentaries on DVD. And so this is before we started to get into VeggieTales and, on DVD, because we got all the VeggieTale videos on VHS, but DVD was it was there. So it'd probably be a two-way tie between either Ice Age or the original National Treasure, which I also loved that movie.
Oh, that was a good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. There are probably listeners who don't even know what VHS is.
I don't know. Is it all the Zoomers, man?
How do you feel?
That's sad.
They'll never know the joy of when the teacher pushes in that cart with the TV and the VCR combo into class. And you're like, yes, today is like a free period.
Or the feeling of dread when you put a video in and realize it's at the end of the movie, so you have to like manually rewind it all the way back to the start so you can watch it.
Did they have that in where you guys are at? Be Kind and Rewind? Like if you rented a movie and you didn't rewind it, charge you an extra $1 or something?
Definitely.
Oh, we never got charged for it, but that would have been a good idea. Totally. All right, I'm going to say my most I'm trying to work out which one is more rewatched, but I can't figure it out. So I'm going to say 2, but I'm only going to talk about 1. I'm pretty sure I have watched Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, like an absurd amount of times. But I've talked about Star Wars to death on this podcast. So the other one that I have rewatched probably equally or maybe more, I'm not sure, would be Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. Watch it every single year.
I've seen that
on Christmas Eve. And this last year I actually watched it twice because I watched it once with my sister and then I watched it again with my wife closer to Christmas. So yeah, it's just like a classic in my household. It's tradition. So yeah, I love that movie. Amazing.
Very cool.
I'd never actually seen A Nightmare Before Christmas before either until I spent Christmas with Josh and Danelle one year and they were watching this movie. I was like, what is this? Is this a horror movie? Why are you watching this movie? But they loved it and I didn't hate it. So there you go.
That's a glowing recommendation.
The highest compliment I can receive from Jesse.
Oh,
he didn't hate something I showed him. Amazing.
Josh. No, it's a good movie. All right, so this is cool. Justin, I guess for the handful of people who don't know who you are, would you be able to just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the space where you're at right now, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Justin Khoe, originally born and raised in Southern California. Right now, I live with my wife and my dog in the Pacific Northwest near Portland, Oregon. For the last 4 years, I was running a YouTube channel called That Christian Vlogger, which was focused on, Bible teaching, questions and answers, conversations with different Christians on different lifestyle subjects and things along those lines. Right now, I currently have switched shows and I guess branding and everything else like that, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But in addition to creating content on the internet, I do a little bit of a consulting kind of side gig with pastors and people all around the country who want to learn how to do social media a little bit better. And I also work with a really cool organization called the Center for Online Evangelism as one of their ambassadors. And so when I travel around doing teaching seminars and church presentations, get to share about things like Project Caleb, which is like this massive attempt to redefine what it means to be a Seventh-day Adventist on the internet. As we know, it's not always the most gracious thing. It's not always the kindest depiction of who we are. And so Project Caleb and some of the other things that they're doing out there is help help the picture of Adventism just be a little bit more accurate, a little bit more pretty.
My first assumption that was Project Caleb was to get everybody to listen to Caleb Isley and just copy everything he does. That was my first inclination, that's what it must be, because that's what we all need.
Yeah, we would definitely benefit from doing more of that for sure.
So I remember first finding out about you, Justin, and absolutely being blown away by realizing that there are Adventist YouTubers. I remember back in the bad old days, or the good old days of YouTube, where vloggers and like that was the thing. It was Casey Neistat and it was David Dobrik and a lot of those guys that were top of the pile as far as YouTube and vlogging is concerned. But Christians and especially Adventists have never really seemed to have much of a foothold in YouTube. I know we're talking about what you're doing now, but could you give us a little bit of context for how you got into vlogging and sort of a little snapshot of that journey? Because that is a huge part of why you're at where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is actually in evangelism. I did literature evangelism for 10 years. I think over the time I've estimated I've knocked on like 100,000 doors or something along those lines.
Whoa.
And towards the end, I was teaching at a small evangelism school in Philadelphia and got to meet a young man by the name of Michael Trojanowski III. And his story was not only did he become a Christian, but he became a Seventh-day Adventist because of a YouTube video. And I just thought that that was absolutely brilliant because that sounded like way more fun than knocking on doors. And the whole reason why I was knocking on doors was because I thought that this was an effective means of spreading the gospel.
Yeah.
Speaking of Caleb, it was actually really funny. He posted on Facebook not too long ago, like, what were you doing 10 years ago? And I think 10 years ago to when he had posted it, I had actually deleted all of my social media because I heard a sermon called My Space Disgrace by our good friend David Ashrick, making a case for why social media wasn't all that great. So things have really switched around for me. I ended up starting a YouTube channel, copying Casey Neistat and the whole thing, and the rest is history.
That's ironic that like David Ashrick now has like a killer social media presence. He is like an Instagram addict nowadays. So that is so
absolutely
funny. I was going to ask you, like, this is not related to anything to do with today's conversation, but you said you knocked on about 100,000 doors. Like, that's insane. That's almost 100,000 more doors than I've knocked on when it comes to literature evangelism. I remember doing the...
I should have worked a little harder.
I know. I remember doing it because I was a cute kid when I was a little kid, you know, doing ADRA sort of appeals and things like that, raising money for my Pathfinder Club. And then I remember I did a unit at Avondale College in evangelism, and I had to do it. But it's never really been my thing. But I've always had immense respect for people who can actually do that, put themselves out there and face potential rejection on a daily basis. When you think of the 100,000 or so doors that you knocked on, how many do you think were successful and how many do you think were unsuccessful? Like, do you have obviously you probably don't have data, but like just in reflection of your journey in that area?
Yeah, I would say that it's probably generous to say that 1 out of every 10 persons is somewhat a favorable exchange. And when I say favorable, I mean like, oh, they bought a book or something along those lines.
Yeah.
People are generally speaking decent humans. There are occasional jerks that you meet out there when you're knocking on doors. But as far as like successful transactions and selling a book or signing someone up for a Bible study or getting to pray with someone, maybe 1 out of every 10.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, just thinking about that, are you the sort of person that can just do that? Or like, was there a point where you were thinking, why in the world am I doing this? Because I know for me, like that, a 90% rejection rate would be pretty crushing.
Yeah, I mean, like, it doesn't feel good. I don't think anyone like loves the whole experience of getting a door slammed in their face or being cursed out or getting the cops called on them because of whatever it is. So yeah, there's definitely hard days and there's good days and there's a mix of them. But, you know, as far as what that whole experience taught me was, you know, the whole idea of grit and, you know, not being so overly, I guess, caught up in what you're feeling and internalizing all of that. And so there was a lot I was able to really glean from that. And as far as it comes to creating content on the internet, like that's a super helpful trait because I don't know if you guys get hate mail, but I get hate mail every once in a while. And, you know, it's now when I get hate mail, I actually kind of like feel like it's a trophy. I'm like, oh, I want to show everyone, like, look what this person said. It's like super cool. It means that I'm reaching someone that I wouldn't normally reach. So
yeah.
No, that's true. Yeah, I think the first time we got like a negative review or something, I was kind of like, look, there's actually someone who's like doesn't agree with us and isn't our friend listening. And I felt I was a little bit sad, but at the same time, I think I was more stoked than I was sad because I felt like, I'm actually like we're actually reaching people now, like who are outside of our thing. I don't know. Yeah. Or maybe it was just one of our friends who are like, I hate them achieving their dreams. I don't know.
Could have been. Could have been
way worse, actually.
I think it's the difference between like having an audience that is like your close friends / people that are associates or like friends of friends to, actually we're reaching out to people and people are listening that are not our friends. And maybe they think of themselves as our enemies or we are their enemies or we're the enemies of the church. But that's obviously a very rare percentage of people. But yeah, it's it's a very, very strange thing, at least for me, to be somebody who is notable, but also on another sense, very nobody. You know, like we're regular people, and in some space, it's like we are notable, but at the same time, we also just regular people who have friends and families, and we have issues, and we go and buy groceries and all that sort of stuff. Like, what I'm trying to say is we're regular people just like you, dear listeners, us celebrities. What a jerk thing to say. I'm sorry.
The worst is when like you have that one friend who like blows you out of proportion when introducing, like, oh my goodness,
yeah.
have you ever met these guys? These are the hosts of Burn the Haystack, and they like make this massive deal. Whenever I go and visit home in Southern California, I always have a handful of friends. When I see them again, like, oh my gosh, is it that Christian vlogger? And they start yelling and screaming like it's a thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys shut up.
The worst thing was I had a friend of my brother's. I went to church with my brother who lives in Sydney, Australia, and I went to his church, and he has this friend who apparently listens to the podcast. And I remember when he shook my hand, like, hey, I'm Josh. Hi, I'm Jesse. His name is Josh. What the heck? There's Joshes everywhere. That's
ironic.
They're taking over. And he was like, oh my gosh, I'm the biggest fan. I'm like, why? I was like, this is the weirdest thing. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
So,
well,
yeah.
I'm interested in... sorry, Jesse.
No.
But I'm interested... I mean, so the Christian vlogger thing, obviously it was going pretty well. You had some pretty viral videos. I noticed, especially the ones about like sex and sexuality. They tended to hit pretty high numbers, which was really cool. I think there's somebody talking about it in such a public space, but I'm sure you would have copped a lot of mixed responses to those as well. But I don't know what. Obviously, you sort of mentioned at the beginning that we're going through a rebrand. So what sort of made you feel like it was time to close the door on that Christian vlogger, if close the door is the right term to use?
Yeah, I think close the door is a kinder analogy than I've been talking about, like it's dead, put it in the grave kind of a thing. Like it's, for me, it's not coming back up again unless something miraculous happens. Just kind of taking inventory of my life over the last 2 years or so, I can kind of see this trajectory taking place. One of the major differences between that Christian vlogger and I'm listening is who I'm spending my time with and talking to and who the content is really for. With that Christian vlogger, it was a lot of times me spending time with another Christian, and we would talk about things that we agree about to people who would likely agree with us on the thing. And very seldomly did I break that motif. A couple of times I would interview someone who might disagree on fill in the blank, or occasionally a non-Christian might turn around and comment on one of my videos, but those were always outliers. Taking inventory of my life, though, things started to change a lot. Maybe partly because I was, less involved in a local church, or maybe it's just because I'm in Portland and it's a really eclectic place with a lot of really diverse people. But more and more, I was finding myself surrounded with not only non-Adventists, but non-Christians, and just spending time with them, and really at many times feeling inadequate with how do I carry across this conversation without being kind of a jerk, or without kind of totally crumbling under whatever imposed social norm that I might think is at play right there. And as I was kind of like going through this journey, just trying to really feel, how do I connect? Feeling disconnected. I think that's one of the things that Adventism hasn't really gifted me well with, is like being super open-minded to people who see the world differently than I do. And not only that, but being able to converse with them and befriend them. And, I was raised in a bubble, in an echo chamber in many ways. And so interacting with people that were very different was really challenging. And, I'm just seeing God doing that more and more and more. And so when I originally started with that Christian vlogger, it was always meant to be something that was a fairly accurate representation of my spiritual journey. If there's a subject that I'm thinking about, I would try and make a video about it to try and digest it, to get feedback from people and interview an expert or whatever the case is. And given that now I'm spending a lot more time with atheists and agnostics and pagans and Wiccans and fill in the blank, well, then these are the conversations that I want to have more of and to do them better, and also to be able to share them with the world. And so just kind of paying attention to what God was doing, it felt really right.
So it was kind of like you felt like your life had actually shifted from the brand that you had created. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess part of why I wanted to rebrand was there's a lot of, at least I felt a lot of pressure running a ministry called That Christian Vlogger to represent and maybe even defend Christianity on the internet. And, that might be a good thing, but that might also not be a good thing depending on who you're talking to. With someone whose view of faith is that these people are closed-minded and only want to shove their propaganda down your throat, sometimes the most effective thing that you can actually do in that moment is to shut your mouth and listen and maybe ask a question or two, but allow them to speak, because it shifts their mentality of who you are. It shows you as someone who cares about the person, who's interested in the ideas that they have to share, and isn't just trying to win a fight or something along those lines. And so being able to sit across the table from an atheist and hear him rag on God and all the reasons why he thinks faith is stupid, and then just be able to smile and kind of be like, okay, cool, on to the next thing. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. And just let them have the airtime, I felt would be really difficult for Christians on the internet to be able to stomach. I think a lot of people will be like, why didn't you challenge him on this? Why didn't you make your point here and there and there? And they want me to debate and win a fight because that's what maybe they're used to or hoping for in that type of an exchange. So the whole idea of listening, I've seen the power of it in my own personal relationships here in Portland, and as a result, want to try and showcase that to the internet and see what happens when we do that.
There's a handful of Christian YouTube channels that I follow personally, and I'm sure for many people there's maybe one or two. Most of us follow non-Christian YouTube channels when it comes to the content that we consume, and it obviously all depends on what sort of things we're interested in. But do you... And obviously you made this decision for yourself, but in some ways it seems like you, and you may not feel this way, but in some ways it seems like you're saying goodbye to a certain community of types of people. When I think of the YouTube channels, I follow 10-Minute Bible Hour, Religion for Breakfast, a few of those other guys that I think are really great. But one of the things that I've noticed time and time again is whenever almost any subject, it almost doesn't matter what subject is talked about, whether it's about church history, whether it's about Sunday versus Sabbath, whatever it may be. I remember especially when the Bible Project, or Bible Project as now they've rebranded to, is when they did their Sabbath episode, which was followed by so many podcast episodes, which I just consumed. But I remember when they published their Sabbath video, it was just filled. The comments were almost more toxic than your run-of-the-mill gaming, video. It was crazy. There were some people that were just like, you're too soft on this. Why didn't you say that Constantine changed the Sabbath to Sunday? Blah, blah, blah. And some people it doesn't matter. Christ died and did away with the law. Blah, 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 blah. It almost seems that branding yourself exclusively as Christian is almost a way to invite maybe a negative community or a negative culture of people. What were you noticing? Were you noticing anything about the community of people that were commenting on your videos and interacting with your social posts? Was that part of your decision-making process? Or speak to that if you want.
No, not really. I haven't really been I don't really let comments dictate the direction of the channel. Maybe I'll let it influence a subject of the channel. Hey, what kind of subjects are you guys interested in? And then I'll pick a subject and I'll create a video that I feel really comfortable and led to create. But no, I would say that over the course of That Christian Vlogger, it's been very, very positive, maybe whereas in knocking on doors, only 10% have been successful. I would say only maybe not even 10% have been nasty on the internet. Maybe it's more like 1% of comments are kind of jerks. So, things have been going really, really good with the whole That Christian Vlogger branding. It's just, what is the value of being another one of these types of channels is kind of what I'm asking myself. Back when I started, I remember looking on the internet, like literally, this is why I titled it That Christian Vlogger, like literally going to YouTube and typing in Christian vloggers or Christian YouTubers. And, like John Jorgensen, who's a good friend of mine now, he had a channel, and there were two others that I can remember consciously, and those two haven't even, they've basically fallen off because they've got real jobs now. They were doing it while they were in high school. And so when I started, there were no Christian YouTubers. There was no faith representation on the internet, period. And so if someone wanted to learn about Christianity, there wasn't a space for it, at least on YouTube. And so I wanted to step into that gap and try and provide something there. And so I would do that. The landscape is very different today. There are now dozens, if not hundreds, of Christian YouTubers, and there's so much more content that's out there on the internet, and people are doing a great job with that. And so, always recognizing that, there's a time to start something and end something. There's cycles that go on. Just trying to think okay, well, what's this new thing that's going on? And one of the things that I'm seeing as a shift in the zeitgeist, a shift in kind of what's expected and what people are yearning for and hungering for, especially on the internet, is this genuine interaction with people who are different than them. I think everyone's really, really tired of debates and the arguments that take place online. It used to be that you only had experienced that at Christmas or Thanksgiving, like popular, oh, don't talk about religion or politics. But now, all those discussions, we see them every single day. And we all know what it's like to jump on whatever social media platform and to look through the comment section, and it's nasty. And so really, I think that most people presently are hungering for the types of discussions that aren't debates, the types of discussions that don't turn into arguments, where we can actually just genuinely learn from each other and find commonalities there. And so recognizing that that's the shift there, and that's actually what's happening in my life, this is kind of the direction that I want to really be focusing on presently.
Yeah, I think it was towards the end of my time at college that I realized I don't want to comment on things anymore. You know what I mean? About my opinion.
Yeah, it's not so
because
fun anymore.
Felt no, it was fun. I feel like it was fun at the beginning of college, but by the end, so from 2010 through to the end of 2014, somewhere in there, I felt like was when it really just spiraled, because I used to enjoy sharing my opinion, but now whenever you do, it's like no one's actually listening.
Yeah.
And I guess this comes into exactly what you're saying. It's like they're commenting, and then the other person comments, and then they comment, but they're not really actually responding to one another. It's literally just you're throwing comments and opinions at each other, but there's actually you don't actually take their points in. I've never seen a comment section where somebody's just like, yes, okay, I have now come around to your side of seeing things. I apologize, or anything I've never seen it. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe once I've seen somebody say something, and then somebody else will fact check and be like, that's actually not true. And then someone will be like, oh, okay, my bad. But that's about the closest I've seen. I've never seen an actual change of opinion from a comment section, personally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because now we have such an immediate access to the entire world's knowledge. And so now it's really difficult to decipher between what is true and what's not true if you don't have some kind of anchor, some type of moral grounding. And so for a lot of people, they're hearing 100 different perspectives, and they're always trying to figure out, well, which one is right, which one's wrong. And unless you're really diligent, it's hard to get to the bottom of all the data and the research and fill in the blank. And that's true about the God versus no God debate. That's true about political debates or whatever the case is. And so what I see as a trend is not so much the actual substance of your argument anymore, but it's more of instead of an actual philosophical apologetic, it's more of a relational apologetic. I don't always agree with what they're saying, but the way they're saying it resonates with me. There must be something deeper to their argument. that causes them to live in a particular way. And to me, it harkens back to what Jesus says. They'll know that you're my disciples by your love for one another. And so what I've seen in my interactions now is that people who would never listen to a quote unquote argument that I would ever try and make for God or for my particular brand of faith, simply by being in the same space and by listening and being a friend, they're coming around to this in their own time. And it's a much more powerful witnessing tool, if you will.
Oh, I love that. And we're going to continue diving into this and look more into this. We're just going to take a quick break. Thank you.
And we're back. All right, Justin, let's get down to tax. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about when did you start to have these thoughts and what sort of happened after that? Give us a little bit of a picture of what happened after you started to feel a little bit of a shift in your own personal zeitgeist.
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, there was another YouTuber called The Raging Atheist who made some really nasty videos about me, just kind of attacking me and calling me all kinds of mean names and things like that. And instead of doing what I would normally do, which is either just immediately ignore and ban the guy from commenting on future videos or fighting back, I just decided to write in and be like, yo, dude, thank you for engaging with my content and taking the time to create this video and yada, 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 yada. And that would be like the start of what's an ongoing relationship, an ongoing friendship. We've done several videos back and forth, and he'll make a video, I'll respond to it, and vice versa. And basically, long story short, I remember he was live streaming one day on his channel. It was The Raging Atheist and his friend, The Frustrated Atheist. And they're just live streaming.
What a team.
Yeah, tag teaming. It was really fun. And they're just going off on, Christianity is stupid and this and this and this. And I remember one thing in particular stood out in my mind. They said, God is literally worse than Hitler. I'm like, oh, shoot. They said Hitler only killed 1 million people, but God is going to murder and burn people in hell, billions upon billions of people. And this is the God that the Bible talks about, and yada, yada, all these different kinds of things. And I remember right before that moment happened, I jumped in the live chat, hey, what's up, Raging Atheist? Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Hope the family's okay. So I jump in this live stream and the Raging Atheist on air is oh, hey, shout out to that Christian vlogger. He's in the chat, really cool guy. He actually talks to his friend, the Frustrated Atheist. Says, this guy is actually different than other Christians. He's really cool. You'd actually like him. So the Frustrated Atheist is well, why don't you invite him on live stream right now? And so in 3 minutes, I'm live on his channel, hanging out with 2 other atheists as we're talking about God and all these things. So when the thing about God is worse than Hitler comes across, they ask the question, how could a God burn people in hell forever and ever? They toss the question to me, what do you think? And so, of course, during that time, I'm just smiling. I'm this is perfect. This couldn't be any better. I'm yeah, actually, I agree with you. I think that would be a really terrible God. I don't believe in that kind of God either. And I just remember them being so confused and stumped. What in the world? Who are you? What do you believe? What kind of Christian are you? And oh, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. Thanks for asking. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. And the Raging Atheist is oh my goodness, that makes so much more sense. He says I know Seventh-day Adventists. They run the place. And it turns out the Raging Atheist actually lives in one of the meccas of Adventism. The Raging Atheist was born and raised and currently lives in Battle Creek, Michigan.
Oh my goodness.
So he's had so much interactions with Adventists, and now we're having this really favorable exchange on the internet. Fast forward to this last summer, so a year and a half goes by. I have this idea for this new show, modeling what does it look like to have kind and thoughtful conversations with people who see the world differently. And the first person that I think about who I want to launch this series with is no one other than the Raging Atheist himself. So I hop on a plane, fly all the way to Battle Creek, rent a car, end up driving to his apartment, and we spend like 14 hours together hanging out. And like he even had his little girl, his daughter, take the day off from school, and so we got to see her. Emily, my wife, comes, and the four of us spend all day together. We had like 2 or 3 different meals together. Went back to his apartment, got to hang out, share life stories, the whole thing. He gave me a tour around Battle Creek, my first time there, showing me kind of like where he grew up and telling me the story of this is the hood that I grew up with. This is where I bought my drugs over here. This is where I broke into that home over there, and like just sharing this story about who he is, where he's come from, and how his life experience has caused him to be such an angry anti-theist. And so we shot those episodes. We shot a couple of videos for his channel. He ended up doing an interview for me. And at the end of the day, it was like this beautiful moment. We had dinner together and just having a good time. He said something to me that like to me is like the real value of this type of an experience. No one ended up changing each other's minds. He didn't convince me to become an atheist, nor did I convince him to be a Christian. But he did say this. He said, "Justin, I want to thank you so much for being out here. It's been awesome." He says, "I think I've made a friend for life."
Wow.
And like, of course, like I'm just smiling because I feel exactly the same way. That Ronnie, even though he's so different than me, that's his name. The Raging Atheist's name is Ronnie. Ronnie is exactly the kind of person that I want to spend more time with. He's the kind of person I want in my life because, one, I get to learn from him. I'm challenged and I'm caused to think deeper about different things, but also, like, he's a great guy. He's a caring father. He's a good human being. Sure, we've got some things that he can work on, but I've also got things that I can work on. And like the cool thing is, like looking through the eyes of faith, like I can actually see God at work in his life in ways that he's not privy to yet. And so it's just being in that space and being vulnerable and being willing to sit there and listen. Like you can listen, like the first episode is live right now. The vast majority of that conversation, I'm listening. I think we I guess that's the why I called the show I'm Listening. I mean, we ended up interviewing for like an hour and a half, and I maybe talked for 10 minutes. Like it's mostly me just sitting there, asking a question, and him talking.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Did you find it hard to listen to some of the stuff he said and just sort of sit there and not object?
You know,
because I think for me, I have something like rise up every now and then. If somebody says something to me and I know I could have like a real banger of an answer, I find it real hard sometimes to sit there and listen, even though I know I need to. But you just get that like temptation.
Yeah, I think sometimes it can be difficult. It's harder to be. I don't know. For me, it's harder like when it's on the internet because I want to like be that pithy, like give that smart comment, like "ha, I showed you" kind of a thing. But for whatever reason, at least when I was hanging out with Ronnie in person, it was just such a good experience that I actually really wanted to listen. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to understand where he came from and understanding his story. So I remember asking like, okay, so when did you decide to leave your faith? Because he was raised in a Christian home. He says, when I was younger, I was praying a lot of different things and no answered prayers. And because of that, I ended up leaving. So of course I asked him, okay, well, what were you praying for? What were you hoping for? And he shares with me, he says, I was hoping for transformation. I was hoping to become a good son. Like, I wanted to be the kind of son that my dad could be proud of. I was hooked on drugs. I was violent. I was always angry, screwing up, couldn't this, how he would describe his life. And I wanted to change. And so I remember praying that morning, asking God to change who I was, to change my heart, to make me a good human being. And then later that day, he says I would get high and go rob someone or something along those lines, and just change never came. And I remember, later on in that day, asking him, hey, what would it look like if we did a thought experiment where, let's imagine that God does exist and God's a good God and he loves you and all the things that, I would want you to believe. But let's just imagine it's true. Why would a good God not answer your prayer? And he thought about that for a while. And then he said, I think it's the same reason why my dad didn't bail me out of prison. For context, Ronnie had gone to prison. I think he had got caught selling drugs or breaking and entering or violence or something along those lines. And if I remember the details, I might be off in this one or two details, but he says, I went to prison. My dad had the opportunity to bail me out, and he didn't. And so I stayed in prison for like a year or two or something along those lines. And I asked him, well, why did your dad not bail you out? He says, I think the reason why my dad did that is to teach me. Because if he had bailed me out, I would have just gone the next day and got caught up in all that stuff again. But the fact that he left me in there, he did it to teach me so that I would learn to change. And I said, do you think your dad made the right choice? And he pauses for a moment, and then he says, yeah, I think it's the best thing that he's ever done for me.
Wow.
And I'm just like, oh my gosh, that was amazing, because that is the gospel, and you didn't even know, you made the connection, because I started off asking you, why did God not answer your prayer? And you answered a story about your father not answering what you wanted, and it's the best thing that he's ever done for you. And so he said, I think the reason why God didn't answer that prayer then is because now I'm the kind of person who's reaching across the aisle, who's trying to talk to the atheists and tell them we don't have to be angry at God anymore. We can have these conversations, and it just went right over his own head as he's saying these words, and I want to jump out of my skin and make the point and be like, bro, did you see what you just said? But that wasn't the place for it, and so I just let the moment pass, log it away in my head. It's like, wow, God's doing some stuff here, and it's really cool.
Wow. Oh man, it's mind blowing. Yeah. So you've had the interview with the. Sorry, I'm confused. Was he the raging atheist or the frustrated atheist? I'm getting back and forward. I don't want to.
Yeah, he's the raging atheist. Yeah.
Okay. So the raging atheist. What are some other interviews you've got sort of lined up? Are we allowed to know about it? Or,
yeah, for sure.
Is it top secret?
We've got a lot of things lined up. I'm going to be talking about marijuana and drugs with my barista from the coffee shop that I frequent locally. We're going to be talking about abortion with a friend that I actually go to the same church with, who has had an abortion and is still pro-choice. And we're going to talk about why and how does that even work. We'll talk about what does it look like to be a faithful Christian if you are gay, especially when you're actually affirming. And so I went up to Seattle to talk to a friend who's an openly gay man who's got a master's in psychotherapy and theology and believes that God blesses same-sex relationships. If everything works out this week, we'll do a series with Mormon missionaries. They knocked on my door last week, and so I told them, hey, come on through. I want you to tell me everything that you want me to know, and let's talk about Mormonism and what is it and why are you Mormon and all these things, and lots of things. I'm really, really excited about it. But I think one of the stories that I'm most excited about actually is coming from my barber, Chico. Chico is another one of these ongoing and developing stories. A year ago, I was looking for a new barber, and I stumbled into this shop and got to meet Chico. And I've been going there getting my hair cut for the last year. And Chico's got the most amazing stories. Every time I talk to him, there's something new that he's experiencing. I remember not too long ago, he told me where he was raised, which is in Texas. His grandmother was a bank robber, and they were oh. It's okay, and his whole family was part of the Mexican mafia, and organized crime, and just what in the world, far out experiences. But when I first met Chico, he told me that he had actually gotten out of prison. He was in prison for 5 years because he got caught selling meth. Apparently you don't want to sell meth, and if you're selling meth, you definitely don't want to sell meth to the feds, which was a mistake that he had made. So he's in prison for a couple of years, typical kind of story as far as gang banging lifestyle, drugs, and all these different things. And he's in prison. He's discouraged. He's depressed because his son is on the outside, his family's on the outside, and he's just in prison. And as it turns out, he's the first of his gang to make it to prisons. And so in an attempt to protect him from rival gangs in the prison, they ended up throwing him in solitary confinement. So he's just by himself in the dark, just super discouraged. And in a moment of desperation, he prays out asking God for help. And So he cries out, and like he has this experience in solitary confinement where all of a sudden, boom, he's hit with like this like blinding light. He has this sense of warmth in him, and even though his circumstance is terrible, he's at like perfect peace. He tells me like, I've never been more at peace than in solitary confinement in that moment. And I'm like, whoa, like that's crazy. And so, over the course of a year, he's unfolding this story. And every time I get a new haircut, I get a new kind of act in the story. And so, like, this part of the story is when he's out there searching for God. Like, he knows something's there, doesn't know what it is. So out of prison, he's searching. And he ends up in South America, along the Amazon River, in, like, the jungle of Iquitos, Peru. And it's like a typical shaman type of an experience. Think of like a bonfire, banging drums late at night, trees over you, stars above, and like there's this chanting, and the shaman creates this drink, and he gives it to you, and it's called ayahuasca. And what happens is when you drink it, you end up hallucinating. And so every time he does it, like he has these weird out-of-body experiences, these hallucinations, this interactions with the divine. This one time his soul leaves his body and he's flying around the stars and he's sharing all these things. And I'm just like, wow, like I do not know what to do with this story. Like this is not the kind of guy I ever imagined trusting with a razor blade next to my neck. And yet I'm here listening to these stories. And one time he was telling me, and this is where it started to like get really interesting, like, oh wow, there's something here. Like this isn't just like a weird dude with weird experiences, but God's doing something right here, right now. He was out, I think he had like a bad experience. And so he leaves the bonfire and he's still kind of tripping out, and he walks out and there's all these stars overhead, and he hears this voice, I am the Alpha, I am the Omega, the beginning and the end. And he's just like, that's so beautiful. I think like, and that's all he knows. Like he's not really like, never really had a background in studying the Bible or anything like that. And he's just like, his mind's blown. And like one of his experiences, I think this is the one that like really was hard for me to wrestle with and grasp. So 6 months into our journey, this was like this last summer, I'm like, man, I got to interview this guy because he's just like a wealth of stories, super different experience, not sure where it goes and what's the ultimate point and how to make it all neat and nice. And I think that's one of the challenges of listening to people with different perspectives. You feel like there has to be a conclusion, like, bam, gotcha, or I win now, now you're like, and I didn't know what that would look like, or if I would even get that, or if it's even important to be looking for that at all. I get the sense that it's not important to be looking for, but at that time, I wasn't so confident about that. So we're sitting in my apartment, and he's sharing this story about his most recent trip to Peru. He has this moment, his soul leaves his body. And I understand I'm using language that's going to make all of our Adventist listeners really uncomfortable, but just this is how he shares the story. And he comes back to his body, and as he looks down, he notices that his body is in a really particular position. He's doing this kind of a motion, and for those who are listening, I got my right hand up, like straight up, with like my elbow bent in, with like 2 fingers up, and the other hand is kind of like making a perpendicular angle, a right angle to the other arm. If you've ever seen one of those like Hispanic, like Catholic candles, I mean, I guess it's not a Hispanic candle, a Catholic candle where Jesus is doing that blessing pose, that's the pose that he is doing. He's like in this blessing position. And as he looks down, he sees himself doing that. And then he looks across from him, and sitting directly across from Chico is none other than Jesus himself. And Jesus is actually mirroring Chico. He's doing the same blessing position right there in front of him. And so he tells me that in this moment, Jesus and Chico, the two merge to become one, and they merge. And as they merge, he has a very familiar sensation. He's it's almost as though he's transported back to the solitary confinement. He's filled with this warmth and this glow, blinding light, this sensation of peace, and like they become one. And in this moment, now he knows Jesus, is what he's sharing. Whoa. And I'm getting so hyped for this. I'm like, bro, you just saw Jesus. Like, this is so crazy. And like he's just telling the story, and there's joy on his face, and he says, and so now I believe in Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, there's the neat ending I was looking for. Like, this is perfect. But before I could like celebrate or affirm him, He then goes on to say, and I believe in Jesus, and now I believe in Buddha, and now I believe in Muhammad, and I believe in Mother Ayahuasca. And he says, I believe in all of it, bro. I believe in everything now. And I'm just kind of like, oh, like, yeah, so close, you know? Not sure what to do with that. And like, that's where that interview ends. That was 6 months ago. Just about when that interview was conducted, and I didn't have a neat wrap up to it. I just told him at the end, bro, like, I'm so glad that I get to be with you here on this journey. Like, it's so beautiful. Like, your story, I see God written all over it. Like, I see you got a pure heart. Like, and I'm just like affirming him and just speaking life over him, because God's doing this thing in his life, even though I don't know the end of the story, because, you know, his life still continues. But here's the thing, like 6 weeks ago, the story took a massive turn. Massive, like mind-blowingly massive. So we ended up going out to dinner. We've gone on a handful of meals during the time that he was exclusively just my barber and not as much like my friend, though we were moving in that direction. But we were having Mexican food, having burritos, and he told me, bro, I've been having nightmares for like the last several weeks. I'm like, oh, okay. And something about Chico is that he always has vivid visions and dreams and nightmares, and like, he just is like tapped into the supernatural at a level that makes me very uncomfortable with, because I don't have any experience like that in these ways. He says that, you know, I wake up in my dream in my bed, and there's this little girl standing next to me, and she speaks a curse over me, and this is happening regularly. And the curse is this: death is coming, death is coming, death is coming. And he's terrified. Like, this is like some stuff you see in a horror film. Like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Yeah. And so he says, in a like self-defense mechanism, in his dream, he grabs this girl by the shoulders and shakes her and says, no one knows when death comes but God. And then at that dinner, he says, I don't even really believe it. I want her to stop talking. Like, I'm so terrified. No one knows what death is but God. And so he said, I've been having these nightmares for weeks or months at the time. It's like, I don't know what to make out of all of it. And so, of course, he reaches out to the person that has been his spiritual guide up to this point. He texts his shaman who's in Peru, like, what's the story here? And his shaman gives an interpretation of the dream, saying, you know, sometimes the death that's coming isn't a physical death, but is a spiritual death. And I'm like, oh, shoot, like, that's good. Like, that's really, really stinking good. And he's like, yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. And so he's going through this, and he eventually asks his shaman, like, hey, so what's your opinion on the whole, like, Jesus thing? He's thinking back to how Jesus made him feel that last time that he had a vision of Jesus. And it comes out that the shaman, he says, funny story, like, I actually believe in Jesus. Like, before every ayahuasca service, I asked Jesus for permission to heal people. And Chico's like, oh, what in the world? Yeah, like, wild stuff, right? And so now Chico's like really intrigued about this Jesus character. And so I think just in his room, he like super awkwardly like lifts his hands and it's like, okay, Jesus, like, I'll give you a chance. Like, I don't know. Like he doesn't know what the words are, doesn't know what the proper body mechanics are meant to be. But this is like the time where he's just opening his heart for the first time to Jesus in whatever way that looks. And so we're sitting there. He's telling me the story at the Mexican restaurant. He says, I haven't had a nightmare about Jesus or a nightmare ever since doing that.
Wow.
I'm like, whoa,
Oy.
Incredible,
Cool.
incredible.
Yeah.
So I invited him over to my house to hang out with Emily and I like a week or two. I think like a week after that. And he comes back and he's like, bro, I just had another dream, another vision. It's like, man, this guy's got so many visions. And I might be butchering like the order of the visions, but these are all the stories that he shares with me. And so he says, I had this vision, this dream of like this beautiful, like geometric, like really intricate design, like art type of thing. He's like, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was this thing that was moving and breathing. And in my dream, I knew that it was a womb. And out of this womb, it pushes out this name, and this name is Anaya. And in this dream, the voice says, "This is Anaya. This is what you will call your daughter." And I'm sitting there in this living room like, man, I really wish Daniel was here to help me interpret this dream, because I got nothing on, like, I don't, like, I mean, the whole, like, death to spiritual death, not physical death, like, oh yeah, I could chime in on that because that makes sense with my understanding of how things work. But I'm just like, cool, dude, like, that's awesome. Like I'm happy for you. And just like listening to his story as he's going through it. A couple days go, actually like 1 or 2 days go by. And then he sends me through a text, "Bro, now I know for a fact that God is speaking to me." I say, "Oh, what do you mean?" And he says, "I Googled the name Anaya, and this is what comes up." And he sends me a screenshot, and it says, "Anaya, derived from the Hebrew, translated to mean God has answered." And I'm like,
wow.
Oh shoot. And apparently this is the thing that tips on, like that changes everything for him, because now Chico like is in his bathroom on the dirty floor on his hands and knees, his face is on the ground, and he's just weeping and sobbing for like 5 minutes, because the thing that he's always wanted is finally there. He's always wanted a father figure. He's always wanted someone to be there for him. And now God has revealed himself in this way. And like he's fully surrendered, fully giving himself over to Jesus. And like it was just this beautiful, beautiful moment. And like there's so many more things that's been going on in his story, so many other visions and dreams. And like it's incredible to see him travel through this. The latest dream he shared with me is that he had this vision and this voice comes in and it just says, "Follow the word, follow the word, follow the word." And he's like, I just take that to mean that I'm on the right path. Keep going. Like, this is good. Like, thumbs up, Chico, keep going. And I give him the interpretation. Like, this is actually, I'm like, I finally feel like, wow, God, like you've put me in this position to give him the interpretation of that dream. And I start breaking him down to him. In the beginning was the word, and the word was like, Jesus is the word. Like the Bible is the word. And like, I'm breaking him down, breaking these things down. And his eyes out, he's like, bro, that's beautiful. Like, that's exactly it. And like, just, it resonates with him. And so I give him my Bible and I just start instructing him like, hey, like, read through the book of John, follow the word, follow Jesus. Like, and he's going through this thing. So every once in a while he'll send me like a Marco Polo, because we are friends on that app. He's like, yeah, man, this is incredible. I'm just learning this. And like this, like God is like downloading knowledge into his brain. And it's so beautiful to see the transformation that's taking place. The other day, he was like, I got a 2-hour break from work. He's like, I've just been reading through the book of Acts and it's amazing. And like, now we get to like journey together as brothers. And it's just this beautiful, beautiful thing. And the cool thing is from the time that we're recording this, in like 10 days, if everything goes according to plan, Chico's going to get baptized and like officially make that commitment to Jesus. And it's just like all set down because I got my hair cut and I listened to someone's story and I was just simply open to what God wanted to do in that moment. And like, I know that not all my stories are going to have this beautiful bow that I can put on top and be like, see, this is the proof. But I'm seeing transformation in Chico's life. I've seen it in Ronnie, the raging atheist life. And it's just like, God is so good and he works in ways that I don't understand. And as much as I used to think that like arguing and debating around subjects was the best way to convince someone, I'm seeing something different. I'm seeing something new. And it's just simply showing up in the way that Jesus showed up. As a friend, as someone who cared, there's like that passage that many of us have heard. Christ's method alone brings true success, right? The Savior mingles with people. Initially, I was going to call this show Mingle because it was based off of that model of just spending time with people, but it sounded a lot like a dating app, so we decided not to go with that. But it's this. It's like show up in the way that Jesus would show up and let him work.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Wow.
Oof. Man.
Yeah.
I'm just like sitting here in that story and just it is confusing me and challenging me and blowing my mind. And yeah, but also how inspirational is that?
Yeah.
As we're coming to the end of our time together, Justin, I'm just thinking from a methodological point of view, when you go into these conversations with people that are so different to you and that have had so many different experiences, what's your approach? Like, is there like a set of questions or thoughts that you lead with? How is it? I mean, obviously, we could say, yeah, Holy Spirit's doing work here, and that's obviously true. But yeah, how do you lead into these conversations?
Yeah, I don't think I've locked down like a science on how to do this super consistently. Like, I'm not having these kinds of conversations when I'm on the airplane. I think just being open to that possibility matters a lot. Like, are you willing to have that kind of potentially awkward conversation and not know what to say and all these things? Like, I think that if you have that willingness, like, God puts people in your path if you're looking for them and you're listening to how His Spirit is leading you. But as far as like when I'm in those conversations, I found like a lot of value in like two general categories of questions. And I've stolen this from a book that's really cool. What's the name of the book? Tactics by Greg Koukl. Really powerful, like relational, like apologetic type of book. And he says these are the two questions to ask. What do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? So when someone shares a particular perspective, just simply asking, well, what do you mean by that? Or some version of that, like, can you explain that again? Or run that by me one more time, or something along those lines. Because whether they're making a point or they're asking a question, this type of question in response gives them the opportunity to expand so much more. And I found that this was really valuable because sometimes they ask me a question and then I say, well, what do you mean by that? Like, can you run that by me again? And then they actually end up expanding on that question in much greater detail. And I realized, oh, the thing that I was about to say wasn't even going to answer the question that they wanted me to answer anyways. So like that has been really helpful if they're asking me something, but if they're making a point about their own perspective, just simply asking them for more details really, really is helpful. And it positions you as someone who's genuinely interested, who wants to think these things through a little bit more deeply. And so asking that has been really, really helpful. And then just, well, why do you believe that? Like, how did you come to that conclusion? Like, well, that's an interesting perspective. I've never heard that. Like, how did you get there? Those types of questions really give people the opportunity to bear their heart a little bit more. And then coupling that with just a willingness to sit there and shut up and let them talk, like, that's great. Like I've gone 30 minutes without actually saying anything because I just asked a question and they just went. And sometimes that may backfire in a sense, like it takes up a lot of time, but occasionally you come across these gems where people really bear their hearts and you can see God at work in their life.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, and I think how much better could we be, like, with just some more listening, and just not listening to rebut or anything, but just listening to soak it in. I don't know. I think it's so valuable, and I think that's a really cool place to land the plane. So thank you so much for what you've shared with us, Justin. I really appreciate this, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Might have to get you back on for an update later on to see more stories like Chico's, because I need more stories like that just don't fit into any boxes. That's just amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Justin, if people want to get in touch with you or follow some of the stuff that you're up to, where do they go?
Yeah, one-stop hub is justinkhoe.com, JUSTINKHOE.com. Should give you access to all my social media stuff, the show I'm Listening, as well as a second show that I've been doing, which we didn't talk about, which is called The Move, which is like Bible teaching stuff. So for those of my audience who really wanted more Bible stuff, I didn't leave them hanging. So justinkhoe.com is kind of the way to get everything.
Cool. And you are producing more episodes of The Move in the future?
Yeah, I've already shot about 80 of those episodes, and we're on only episode 10. So we do about 3 a week that go live. So it'll
Fantastic.
be, The Move is actually both video and audio. So you can do it on podcasts, you can do it on YouTube. Just search The Move with Justin and Jonathan.
Cool. Thank you so much, Justin.
Epic.
Awesome.
That's so cool. Well, thanks everyone for listening today. Again, if you have any thoughts on this episode, we would love to hear from you. Whether you want to just comment in the group or you want to send us a message, you can find links and access to everything, all things at burnthehaystack.org. It's the best place to find everything related to our show.
And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Burn the Haystack. We'd really appreciate that. And if you've been a subscriber for a while, leave us a rating or a review on your podcatching app of choice.
Yes, because they are good things and they help us get more visible and other stuff that probably you don't care about for us, but we do. So it helps other people know that we're legit. So please rate, review, all those good things. English, that's the language I'm speaking. Okay. And stay beautiful. That is Josh and Jesse and Justin out.